Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the SecOps Impact Interview Series. Today with me, I have Monzy Merza. He's the CEO of Crogl, and he's joining me today to discuss really interesting topics. So we'll dive into how we get from security data to investigation decisions and what really makes an investigation work. Welcome, Monzy. If you want to go with short introduction just for the audience, and we'll take it from there.
Great. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Philip. It's good to see you again. I'm Monzy Merza. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Crogl. I've spent many decades in the cybersecurity community. I used to be in the nuclear weapons labs in the United States, working as an applied security researcher. And then I spent about a decade at Splunk and a few years at Databricks after that, as well, starting the go-to-market function for security for Databricks. And before starting Crogl, I joined one of the largest banks in the world because I feel so passionately about this space. I actually wanted to do the job. I wanted to work on tickets. I wanted to really understand and appreciate what security teams go through day by day. And from there, we started Crogl. Crogl is the AI SOC analyst for the enterprise. And we have customers now across Fortune 1000 and large government agencies using Crogl to address thousands and thousands of alerts per day.
Nice. That's really exciting, and I think I went through the same path. I worked also for a really large bank, and probably it is the best place where you can learn from all types of incidents, and you can see how a security product needs to work for really large enterprises, because there you have large, really big teams in cybersecurity, as well the processes that they have around. So yeah, great. Okay, then I'll start with the first one, and how I wanted to structure this episode. I wanted to start what I call on the left side on the house, on the IR cycle. So I'll start with the data. So the data has been something that I feel in cybersecurity we have been working and putting a lot of efforts. I think like 10 years ago, probably we were putting a lot of focus on getting all the data. It was all about, oh, we don't have enough data. The visibility, it's a huge issue. We cannot parse all type of logs. And I think now, fast forward to today, we arrive to that point that we have solutions and we have data lakes. We arrive to a point where we can get all that data, but now it's what we can do with it, how we can make sense of it, and what it takes to be in a good shape so we can investigate further. So, I wanted to ask you, how do you see this, I would say, ingestion or data? Is it still a problem, or where we are currently at it, and what you have seen with customers that you're working on, or how you're approaching it with Crogl?
Yeah, data continues to be the anchoring point for all security investigations. I don't think anybody gets to skip the problem, and I think it becomes even more important now that we have access to AI tools and more sophisticated automation technologies and agentic frameworks. The data becomes more and more important. I'll tell you how critical that was to Crogl. When we started Crogl, the first problem that we worked on was how would we operate and analyze in an environment where the data is not normalized. I've met thousands and thousands of organizations over the course of my career, and I don't know of a single organization whose data is perfectly normalized. And now, especially, it's becoming more and more of a challenge where we have customers at Crogl right now that have data in Splunk, they have data in S3 buckets, they have data in Microsoft Log Analytics all at the same time, and they have XSOAR platform from another vendor, right? So this is a very, very complicated space, and I feel if somebody were to come to the customer and say, oh, you have to normalize all of your data across all these different things, that's a ridiculous proposition. So data continues to be very critical. And I feel now that organizations have the opportunity to live in a world where their data does not have to be normalized and they can start to connect the dots. If we project out a little bit from this, I believe what's going to happen is this data fragmentation is going to continue to increase. as organizations want to take advantage of more tools, more sources. And yes, within bounds, your data should be collected in certain places, and a lot of companies do that. But at the same time, there's plenty of evidence that says not all data for everyone is sitting in one place. So data is very important, and the ability to analyze the data when it's not normalized across all the different data lakes is also very, very critical.
No, I definitely agree with you, and that's what I've been seeing as well. It's quite, let's say, a challenge nowadays to just normalize the data, then start making sense of it. And something else that I wanted to come by, and it's quite popular, especially when we look at AI solutions, is how we build that knowledge graph from all these data points that we have. Because I think knowledge graph is key to help us then with the investigation. If we don't have the knowledge in the right shape or form, it's for nothing. It's just another data point that uh, probably it won't help your investigation. So yeah, curious to see like what's your opinion on knowledge graph? How important is that also with what you're doing at Crogl?
Yeah, I think it is very critical. And as we learn from customers, the biggest thing that we see is there is a desire to understand how is it that the work actually happens for analysis purposes, whether it's investigation or response or whether it's threat hunting. There has to be something that is able to connect the dots, like, and the knowledge graph creates an opportunity to do that. And without that capability, I don't think, it doesn't matter how good your AI is, you won't be able to actually execute the very basic tasks of security analysis. I'll give you a very simple example, another Crogl customer example, which is these customers have data sitting in, let's say, in Splunk, and there's a field label in there called source IP, and it has an IP address. Well, these customers also have S3 buckets, which have a field, which may have a blob in there that has a field type called SOURCE_IP. Now they're the same because, in Splunk, maybe they normalize it as the data was coming in, and S3 buckets had just posted the raw data there as long-term backup. And so there has to be something that relates that these two IP addresses, even though they're called different things, are really the same thing. And so instead of trying to transform that data and say, no, everything has to be labeled correctly, what we do at Crogl is that we build a knowledge graph that maps all these different fields across the different data lakes, so that when somebody asks, well, how many times has an IP address been seen in the past, we're able to then look in both places simultaneously. And this leads to a broader question, like, if you can't do that in your security operation, then that very simple basic thing, then it doesn't matter what kind of AI tool you use, because even if you have the most powerful of LLMs or the most powerful of GPT capability, that capability doesn't really know your data. And so if it doesn't know your data, well, then it can't answer the appropriate question. So you have to kind of layer these two components together, where you want to have the knowledge graph, and you have to have the rest of the other componentry of the AI system to assist that. So the knowledge graph is absolutely critical. The second piece of that knowledge graph that's also very important is that the knowledge graph has to be a learning knowledge graph and not a learned knowledge graph. And what that means is, practically speaking, is when we build a graph, we have to appreciate the fact that it was built in time. And so what we've done in Crogl is that we update that knowledge graph over time, because new data comes in, new fields comes in, labels might change. And so we have this ability not just to build a knowledge graph, but to constantly keep that knowledge graph updated. And that becomes very, very important. And that's what makes it a learning system in that knowledge graph respect. And it also creates other downstream effects maybe we'll talk about later. The biggest one just being transparency. In terms of how the system operates.
I really like how we have that also, like constant updating of the knowledge graph, because I think that's key. And from the implementation that I've seen of AI SOC and some stuff that I've tried, I think it was really important whenever the tool would be able to go every time and understand my log sources, the schemas that they've changed, because it can be tomorrow you're adding new log source. Investigation, they don't wait for
Yeah.
you to go and update it. They want the data to be available right away. So if you're not doing that constant updating, you're just missing, and you'll have inaccurate data. And I think that's another thing, that we have a lot of solutions out there that they don't have this constant updating or feedback loops. And then many, they stand with opinion, oh, the AI, it's not accurate. And as you said, it's not that. It's just key how you're building your knowledge graph and how you connect the data. And something else that I wanted to touch base is, so as we are moving forward on the right cycle, or I would say like on the middle side of the investigation, something that I wrote about a few blog releases ago, and it was about the playbooks and how it's changing the way that we are seeing playbooks. So we all know them, all that static 5 to 10 steps that usually the junior analysts will read them, and they'll forget them forever there until
Yeah.
someone is updating them with the next incident. But now they're different because we need to feed them to the system. We need to teach the machine how to operate on them. So I was curious, yes, what's your opinion on the playbooks and how you make use of them?
Yeah, the challenge, I think, so one, I think the general construct of playbook is very important for good security operations. And the ability to execute playbooks and move the investigative process or the triage process forward, or even a threat hunting process, it's very important to have a playbook. So the question is, well, why is the playbook so critical? It's critical because one, it is the second leg of the three-tier stool. We talked about data. The playbooks are actually are attacking a problem around process. So data is being one important aspect, and then process being another very important aspect. Now, process has to be consistent, has to be repeatable, and it has to be transparent. And playbooks historically have done that, but there is a weakness in the way playbooks have been done up until the AI SOC organizations have started to implement, or AI SOC technologies have started to implement them. And that fundamental weakness historically in playbooks has been the playbooks are so rigid that anything even changes slightly in the data or in the process, or if somebody has a new idea, that the playbook has to be rewritten. Now, it could be a technical playbook like a SOAR playbook, or even if it's a human written playbook in a Confluence page that somebody says, well, follow these steps. In either case, there's too much friction for that playbook to be updated. But the core principle of having the playbook is correct. It is we want a process so that it's consistent and transparent and repeatable, so that we can demonstrate to ourselves as security practitioners, and also demonstrate to an auditor or to a regulatory body that we're doing our job and we're taking credit for our work. So playbooks are really good for that, for taking credit for our work. Now, so given those problems of brittleness and sort of not the survivability around data changes, that's what historical playbooks have had difficulty with. Now, the approach that we take at Crogl to address that problem is we create playbooks essentially on the fly through a learning cycle, but we still create a playbook that is, we call them response plans, and any action that Crogl takes is rooted in following that response plan, so that there is never any doubt either before Crogl is going to take an action or after Crogl takes a sets of actions, what process was followed. It is very obvious to the human user. So making that process transparent and being rooted and rooting every action in a response plan has two other very important effects for the security teams. The first effect is that you can create an opportunity to have an argument over what was done, because you know exactly what was done. So you can it creates a feedback opportunity back into the system. The second opportunity that it creates is you get to take credit for your work, because when the steps have been followed, you can say, look, these were the steps that were followed. This is what I did, and this is an additional step that I did beyond what was already in the playbook. So it's actually elevating the experience, and it's elevating the essentially the requirement to have a security analyst in the organization to say playbook alone is not good enough. But I am going to use playbook for consistency and for speed, and I'm going to use it for transparency. But then ultimate goal is to reduce the risk. And so in the way we implement the response plans inside of Crogl is, one, they're very clearly articulated. But then on top of that, just like the knowledge graph, the response plans themselves can evolve. As analysts take additional action, the system learns from the analyst actions, and then the response plan is updated. So now it's better. So the more work the humans do, the response plan gets better, the more credit the people can take for their work, and the fewer things that they have to do in the future, so they can do the things that the machine can't do. And so so going back all the way to your original question, right? Playbooks are important. Historically, playbooks have had weaknesses, but now we have an opportunity to have this response plan style work that creates transparency, consistency, and improvement for analysts to take credit for their work.
Great, great. I really like your thought process, and I was smiling earlier because it reminded me of the days when, even now it happens when I'm building an automation and everything works fine until the moment the input is changing and whole thing is broken, and you need to go figure out, add another step. And over time, you just end up with playbook that has 20 or 30 different filters just as at the input, and it's just chaos. Then it's really hard to understand it. Um, but I wanted to ask you, what's your view on how much you can let, I would say, the user to customize the playbooks? Because I've seen many solutions, they act as black box. So this is a playbook, it runs, that's it. You cannot do much. You can raise like support ticket and they can edit it. But me as an analyst and as an engineer, I want to have some sort of control. I want like something changed. We had an incident, lessons learned. We need to change some of the steps. I want to go disable or add a specific step. What's your view on that, and what's the approach of Crogl on this specific function?
The core of all of this, the way we built, maybe I should have maybe said this at the very onset of the conversation. When we created Crogl, we had a crazy dream. And we said, what if we created a product that would enable every security analyst to be as effective as the entire team? That's a ridiculous proposition. We're not even saying we'll make him as effective as the best person on the team. We're saying we'll make him as effective as the entire team. It's a crazy idea, right? And we said, but seriously, if that was the hard problem to solve and the goal to achieve, what would we have to do? And one of the basic principles of this was that we boiled it down to was, if we are ever able to create a system like that, the system will need the ability to learn from the analysts in the whole team, so that system can then serve those analysts. And so when we take this back to the concept of playbooks, or when we take this back to the concept of, well, how can the analysts do a better job, and how can we actually extend the work of the analyst, then it becomes very obvious, right? And the core point then becomes, the goal is to make the analyst a decision maker, and to give them as much capability as possible in the appropriate sort of user experience mechanism, so that they can do whatever they want. Because ultimately, we recognize very deeply that it is really the analyst that makes the difference. The AI SOC does not make the difference. There were many companies earlier on, if you go back and look at the Wayback Machine and look at their marketing around AI SOC agents, they were trying to replace analysts in tier 1, tier 2, whatever tier that you want. I think that's kind of a naive proposition, because that means that they have not done the work. So because they think that all the work is sort of bounded in some kind of a way in a digital forum or in a digital medium. So they don't actually appreciate. I think fewer people are now starting to use that vocabulary, because they're getting into the physics of the work and they're starting to appreciate the physics of the work. So the goal is really to make the analyst a decision maker. So the way Crogl handles, so now fast forward to your specific question. The way Crogl handles that, we built this in the product in 3 different ways. The first is a very gross cut, in the sense that there is a response plan. You can disable the response plan and say, Crogl, you don't know what you're doing. And the way you can come to that conclusion is when Crogl is responding to alerts, it's making comments and tickets, and you can see very clearly what it's doing. And if you say, well, this thing has no idea what the heck is going on, I'm just going to turn this thing off. So we give that very important control to the user. The second control we give to the user is maybe the user sees that what Crogl is doing is actually very good, right? So it's useful, but maybe there's one thing in there or some minor thing in there that needs to be turned off. So we give the opportunity to the user to individually turn off steps within a response plan. So if a response plan, let's say, has 14 different actions, it's going to go to your multiple data lakes, it's going to talk to your EDR system, it's going to do all these things and put them together. You say, well, I don't really care about this one check, so just turn that piece off. So that's the second level of control at the action level. And then the third level of control is through an API interface and through the CLI interface as well, where an analyst who has an idea, because they have powerful things, right? They have a knowledge graph at their disposal. They no longer have to learn how to write a particular programming language, like a SQL statement or a Splunk, a Splunk query statement. They don't necessarily have to know how to do that, but they know where the knowledge graph is. So they have an idea, and they want to utilize those tools to create a net new response plan, or to use your vocabulary, net new playbook. We give users the opportunity to create a net new playbook from scratch that can be very easily imported into the system. And then for every ticket that comes in, or for every alert that comes in, that playbook will be invoked, and people can see what's happening. So there is those three different patterns of very simple to however far deep that you want to go, and to do the implementation. And the core of this is really about the third pillar of Crogl. So we talked about data, we talked about process. The third pillar of Crogl, which is governance, because we want the user to be in control. We want the user to be able to do whatever they want to do, make whatever changes they want to do, and document and log those changes within the system. So that's very clear to everybody else. So it ties to that third principle of putting the user in control and making sure that they have what's needed for them to do the job.
Nice. I really like your approach to this, and how you're saying is that you have the governance and transparency as well, and also you give a lot of control to the user. I think something that when started to appear AI SOC solutions that we've seen, they were like all black box. It's just you plug and play and that's it. And for me, it starts to create frustration, because I have the engineering mindset as engineer. You want to go customize things. Of course, you want them to work also for the first day, but you cannot have them both. As you get used to the platform, then you want to customize it, and that's quite important to have. My next question is more around, I would say, in-depth investigation, or some that they call like reactive threat hunting. Something that I've seen that is getting a lot of traction in the industry, especially with any automation or AI SOC platforms, is like how fast they can process alerts. And for me, that doesn't show me that, okay, it's fast, but what does fast mean? What if it's just fast and is missing a lot of steps? I mean, me personally, when I'm testing the solutions, I see that sometimes investigation that would take a day, now it will be cut to 3 hours. That's good enough for me. I don't need seconds, because that doesn't give me any confidence that the platform is giving me good results. Something else that I'm afraid of is that when you run a query to your SIEM, there is no magic what you can make the SIEM 10 times faster and get the results. So
That's right.
yes, I'm really curious how you're seeing this, and do you concentrate also on speed, or it's more on just the quality and the depth of the investigation?
We look across three different areas in terms of how we measure our performance from a work point of view. The first one is the obvious one, is speed, and there are some types of speed. So I'll dive into that in a minute. But one is speed, the other one is consistency, and the third one is depth. And you really have to do all three of these. You take any one of these three out of the equation, and whatever investigation that you're doing, whether it's human or machine driven, it's not very useful. And so the way we're able to handle the speed problem is we are accelerating the time to where an alert comes in, grabbing the alert, and then starting to action that alert. So that's an obvious place. We are also increasing speed because we have the queries, and so you don't have to write the query or rewrite the query or remember what the schema is and spend time doing that. So you can take actions, lots of actions very fast. So that's where speed comes into play. The way the consistency comes into play is this concept of the response plan, is that we know what process we're going to follow. And so therefore, the process will be followed consistently. That process is inspectable, so somebody can go change it. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. And that process can be modified, and the process gets updated. So that's the second facet of consistency. It's because of the rootedness and having a process. That's where consistency comes from. The third piece is depth. And so this is where we go back to the data, to the core of it. Like if your Crogl is able to analyze data that is not normalized, which creates this amazing advantage for the user, to where if they want to analyze their EDR logs and they don't know the query or they don't know the actual schema, it's okay. We can still go and query that. Or if they don't remember the schema for their data lake, it's okay. We can still go query that. So now we create this opportunity to have deeper investigations. And very tactically, the way we do that is that for any given investigation, Crogl will try to resolve the MITRE attack kill chain for that, or all the different tactics for a given alert. So it will try to go very deep in every single investigation, as deep as the data will allow it to go. And so now you have, as a consequence, now you have the speed, you have the consistency, and you have the depth, all layered on top of this thing that is very, very transparent and that changes and learns based on what the human user wants to do. So that's how we approach it. Now, the one thing I want to comment on, which is funny to me because I saw this at Black Hat a couple of times and I sort of chuckled to myself, is I've seen demos from some AI SOC folks who will type something in the instant, in the Copilot or the assistant, and show like these, millisecond response time results. Now, those of us who have worked in a SOC or ever done an investigation, we know that's not how the world works. And so, I think most security people are smart enough to recognize that is not even possible. But I don't know why people show demos like that, because they're totally not realistic. And it's they look cool, but in reality, an investigation may still take a few minutes because you're bounded, to your point, Philip. You're bounded by however fast you can execute against your data lake or your SIM. And yes, you can parallelize some things, but we also know as security analysts, you run a query, you get the answer, you filter, and then you go run the next query. You can't parallelize that because you need the first query to finish, because you can go out before you go after the second one. So some of these patterns cannot really be parallelized, and there is a time horizon to it. One thing that I want to talk about from a perspective of that's related to this, from a perspective of threat hunting. So the alert piece kind of is intuitively, we can all sort of make sense, right? Alert comes in, we have some history, we can understand, we can and you can execute and learn from that and say, okay, fine, that's good. But what about a threat hunt? What about a CISA advisory that just popped up and your boss slacks you or something and says, hey, or your colleague slacks you and says, what do we know about this? Or can we do something about this? And so being rooted in that same principle of data, process, and governance, Crogl treats these advisories as documents. And so Crogl is able to learn and extract entities from this document, from a CISA advisory, for example. And then from that advisory can then generate queries. And then as a consequence, be able to do some level of a threat hunt based on an advisory that no one has seen before. And so that is really, really important, right? So that you can get a first cut at something realistic. Otherwise, most of us spend our time when we get an advisory. First, we read it. Some of these are very, very long. Then we spend all our time parsing out all the square brackets out of the IP addresses and all the dots. And then we spend a whole bunch of time trying to figure out, well, where is this data? And then how do I write this query? And so Crogl takes out a whole bunch of that by reading that document, creating a response plan, and then executing it. And of course, you can see what it did. So then instead of trying to memorize this document, now you can start to actually accelerate your process to work on this particular advisory.
Oh, that's awesome, because then you're going also to the what they call reactive threat hunting. So it's not just based on investigation and you go and search for stuff. You have this proactive where yes, you get just some sort of threat intelligence, advisories, and so on, and you start to search in your environment for that, which is pretty great. And I like one of the things that I'm definitely looking in a ASL platform to have. So we can definitely, I think, we go on and have way longer discussion. But once I wanted to ask you, what's your opinion on the space? So first, I'll tell you where this is coming from, because I think the AI SOC, first it was just starting to develop. Now we're arriving at a point that most of the companies, they start to uh, do trials and demos, and the other half that they're already implementing and they have few months or even a year working with the platforms. And in my view, I've seen that the platforms, they started in the middle and now they started to shift on the left, and then we have the right side, the response. In your view, do you think that the ISAC platforms, they'll get closer to SIEM and MDR, or they would go more on the right side and enter the SOAR area?
Well, I'll tell you what customers tell us, and that's probably the best indicator. I mean, my opinion, sure. I mean, I like to think I'm pretty smart, but I think is more important. I'm not smarter than the collective of our customers, and our customers in the Fortune 1000s. They're big, very well resourced government organizations. So this is the way they view, very complex, high consequence organizations. This is the way they view this problem. They believe that in order to do really good response, full automation response, things like remove the attachment from the mailbox, take the machine offline, remove somebody's credentials, or reduce somebody's privilege level on a system, right? Those kinds of really, really strong response actions. They believe that those response actions require very high confidence investigation. And then on the flip side of that, they also, these organizations want to expand their footprint and the number of things that they want to alert on. So they are not just saying, "Hey, I want to do the alerting that I'm." They don't want to filter the alerts. They want to write good alerts, good detections, but at the same time, they realize that for many of our customers, they say that alerts are going to grow for them, on an annual basis about 30% year over year. I'm rounding up a little bit, but 30% year over year is what the increase is, because they're saying, well, I used to have on-prem, I used to have cloud, now I have this AI and this agentic works and all these different apps and services that my people are using. My volume of alerts is actually going to go up, even if I write really, really good detections, just because people are doing more things. There's a bigger footprint. So there is this aspect of and so they're saying, okay, so I'm going to create more alerts. I need to do investigations in the middle bucket. I need to do investigations and I need to do threat hunts that are really, really high confidence, which I understand what's going to happen. And then I need to take response actions. And today, what customers are telling us is they're looking at Crogl, for example, or even our competitors for that matter, when we are in competitive situations. They're saying, well, I need an investigative thing that is really good at investigations. This way I can drive my alerting, and this way I can drive my SOAR platform. But at least they're not saying this to us today. They're not asking us to be a SOAR platform. Customers saying, Crogl, you're the investigation, the SOAR platform is the remediation, or your investigation and the alerting is going to come from some strong detection engineering platform. However, having said that, what we're also trying to see is, because we have that knowledge graph, and because we have the ability to articulate just any number of use cases for the analysts to exercise their intuition, we're starting to see customers use Crogl to create detections, or what would generally be called detections, and then spiral that immediately into an investigative cycle. So what I believe is going to happen. So that's kind of the customer lens of this. What I believe is going to happen are two big things. The first thing that's going to happen is we're actually going to see a slight shift in the way detection engineering happens, because we have more opportunity within the investigative pillar. And we're going to see more specialization on the SOAR side, also because we have more opportunity in the investigative pillar. And the SOAR is actually going to start to be utilized more, because response is going to be more robust. And people will build more confidence in response because the investigation is so good. So that's one thing that I believe is going to happen. The second thing that's going to happen is we're going to start seeing new participants in this space from the user community perspective. So today, when we look at detection, investigation, or response, we think of them as things that security analysts or SOC analysts do. I see an opportunity. If you think about the CISA advisory example that I gave you, it's a
Yes.
document that creates a process and executes a technical response, right? Or an investigation or threat hunt. I can imagine a possibility where compliance officers and other parts of the business can execute something inside of this investigative platform to say, well, here's a compliance document. Tell me what my posture is. So I see an evolution of the space and more inclusiveness in terms of the people who can utilize data and process and governance across their organization beyond what the SOC is doing. And I think now that creates an opportunity for the SOC to get even more responsibility and to do more for the business in a more proactive way and more in a business value risk reduction way, rather than in the alert response kind of a way.
Nice. That was one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, like how you will see that the SOC teams is changing and the roles within the SOC team, but that you already answered it. So that's quite insightful. I mean, it's unique approach as well. I never thought that. Yes, that also. I thought that yes, we'll have more time for detection engineering. I haven't thought that yes, also the SOAR piece on the response side, it will get even better, which is a really good point.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think it resonates quite good. Then I'll go with the last question that I wanted to ask you for this interview is, do you think that so we have two types of large of language models. So there are the large language models and what they call like small language models or domain specific language models. I was reading an interesting research that were saying that the small language models, they'll be the ones, or domain specific ones, that they will be of bigger use and the industry will start to adopt them more and more. So wanted to hear your opinion on this topic. How do you see, do you think that the small language models will be quite useful specifically for cybersecurity?
When we look at a compound AI system, I think it's important to just put the customer first. And so the question is, what's going to serve the customer in the best way possible? And sometimes the answer is you don't need a large language model, you need a knowledge graph. Or in other cases, the answer is, well, with this particular use case, I need a language model. For another use case, I actually need a relational database. And so I think it's very important for us to continue to stay focused on the customer and say what was going to solve the customer problem. So that's always my sort of driving, that's always my primary driving principle. Then the next question becomes, okay, what's working and what are we seeing and what are the customers telling us in terms of the outcomes that they're achieving, right? So the first one is that yes, when so Crogl deploys with a in the grand scheme of things, a large language model, which is actually very small. In contrast, we you know, and so because it's good enough for us and it's good enough for the customer, you know, when I say us, it's good enough for the customer to make use of it. And so I will already sort of resonate with the assertion that smaller models will be beneficial. So that's one kind of a use case, and that's one observation that we make. The second observation that we make, and we put this as a feature in the product, we have customers asking us to use whatever model that they want. Because what's happening is, just like, you know, proxy services, just like, you know, other authentication services in-house, or search capability, document search capability as a service in the enterprise, our customers are trying to deploy very large language model capability in-house. So they will bring in OpenAI or Anthropic or whoever and deploy these massive access to their organization, and they're putting guardrails and they're logging it and they're monitoring and they're doing a lot of other work around that. And so that becomes their central service for a large language model. And so they've asked us, and we've delivered on this, that Crogl has the capability of bring your own model. So we've gone, like, you know, 2 steps even forward. Whether it's small, whether it's large, it doesn't matter. It's about the customer. and it's about the outcome that the customer wants to achieve. So that's what we feel, which then in turn works really, really well for our customers because they continue to maintain control. So Crogl as a product doesn't require any internet access. It's not a SaaS service. It's a standalone. It can run in the cloud. It can run on-prem. It can run in an air-gapped environment. And so it's in keeping with our general mantra that the customer should always be in control. And then it creates the opportunity for the customer to use whatever technology that they want to use. And I think the space is evolving really fast, which is really cool. And so we need to really continue to focus on the basics of data, process, and governance. And when we build product that's rooted in those three things, and give the control to the customer, then I think you get lots of really, really good opportunities.
Nice. That's really interesting. Definitely differentiator, I think, in the field, because not many other platforms they offer you bring your own data model, which is quite unique. Awesome. So yeah, Monzy, thanks again for coming to the interview series today. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was quite insightful. Learned a few things as well. Thank you for sharing all the insights. And yeah, maybe we'll have the chance to chat again in some of the future episodes.
Thanks, Philip. Really appreciate all the awesome questions, and thank you to everybody for watching. I'll see you again soon.
Thank you, everyone, and stay tuned for the next episode.